Mr. Alambritis, how do you assess the whole Brexit negotiation process? Do you believe we're going to have an agreement soon?
Let me just go one step back and just say that the decision of David Cameron, who was then Prime Minister of this country, to put a referendum to the people of this country is one of the worst political decisions that I have known, and probably the worst since the Second World War. It was a very, very fatal decision, and that's why we're having this internal strife and division in this country. It does look as though there may be a deal, but it will go to the wire, and it will be very, very late in the day. And as Yanagis Varoufakis has said, and he knows how the Brussels machine works, they will leave it right to the last minute. But it looks as though there may be a deal. It won't be a brilliant deal, but the key question then is whether it satisfies the far right of the Conservative Party, and whether it satisfies anyone, or whether there will be a defeat for her, in which case there'll have to be a general election.
Okay. David Davis, the former Brexit minister, said today that the agreement that Theresa May will bring to Parliament will not go through. What do you believe about that? What's your opinion?
Well, David Davis was Brexit minister for 2 years, and he did very little to progress the issue of a deal. But yes, the right wing of the Conservative Party have a problem with Europe, any kind of umbilical cord, any kind of connection. They want to cut all ties with the European Union, and that's what they want. So any deal that keeps us in the some kind of customs union or single market, that keeps us respectful of movements of people, that elongates the transition period beyond 2 years after 2019. I think they may be enough of them to bring it down. But she seems to have worked miracles with the Irish question. So it could be that although the Irish question has befuddled this country for years on end, it could be that if that is resolved, she could get the support she needs. But then you have the Labour Party with a number of MPs who may side with her. There are a number of Labour MPs whose constituents voted to leave, especially up in the north. They may side with her, and that may give her the numbers that she needs. So in today's political world, one cannot predict anything, and therefore it is very, very difficult to predict. But it all goes back to that decision by David Cameron when he had a majority in 2015. He didn't have to do this. He's done it because of whatever issues they had with UKIP. But it was a very, very poor decision, and it will be a sad day if we do pull out.
You've talked about David Cameron, you've talked about Theresa May. But some people say that also Jeremy Corbyn's stance on the issue is ambivalent. What do you say to that?
Well, if I was David Cameron and I saw that I had to work with what I had, and that it was a Labour Party with Jeremy Corbyn and a Liberal Democrat Party that wasn't high in numbers, again, that would have been a good reason for not doing it. Jeremy is for Europe, but he does worry about big organisations or conglomerates. And so a lot of people say his heart wasn't in it. And with these things, people do see through you when you're saying yes on the television, whether you actually mean no. And so therefore, there is some criticism of Jeremy Corbyn, especially in the early days of a referendum, that he wasn't too much into it. I think with Keir Starmer now, Labour are making a good fist of it to get a good deal. I myself, as a leader of a council in South London, which voted overwhelmingly to stay in the EU, I would like the whole thing to be given to a people's vote.
Yeah, but Labour's official position is in favour of general elections instead of a referendum. Do you agree with that?
I think we should go with a people's vote, and if that is put to the people, and the option is to remain, that we remain. I think that is a good position, because a lot of things have changed in the last 2 years. Since 2016, we've seen some of the fabrication, some of the lies used by the Leave campaign. It's all unravelling. This promise of £350 million a week for the NHS is nowhere to be seen. So it's all to play for, but it is sad that this country is divided.
Your speech today at the Cypriot Community Centre is entitled Brexit Advantages and Disadvantages. Can you talk to us a little bit roughly about these advantages and disadvantages of Brexit? Give us a little synopsis of the...
Well, as someone who is for remaining in the EU, someone who's a Cypriot, who believes in Europe and the European Union and the programme, obviously, I will try and see if there are any advantages to Brexit. I will try and look at them and do a small list of them according to the Leave campaigners, but they are far outweighed by the huge number of disadvantages. Let's start with the basics. Driving licences, you need an international permit to drive if you go to an EU member state. You will need, your pensions may not be uplifted, so if you're an EU citizen at the moment, but you go and live in Cyprus or Spain and your state pension is coming from the UK, it won't be in the triple lock, which is a good increase by inflation. If you've got a private pension, the cost may go up, deducted from that pension. Food, drugs, for example. Drugs maybe have to be stockpiled. There's issues there, and EU citizens living here will be in fear of their status. UK citizens living in EU states will be in fear of their status. There's a whole load of disadvantages, but the main disadvantage is that the UK will be outside looking in.
And one little advantage at least.
Well, according to the Leave campaigners, we will be able to claim back our borders. But with internet and with there are no borders these days. What we've seen over the last few years is the death of distance, and that's a good thing. If people can go to the moon, then why shouldn't we be able to travel freely throughout borders? So that's what they think is an advantage. Regulations some people say the EU is regulatory driven. We won't have to go according to those regulations, but there are regulations that protect consumers, food safety. There are regulations that protect workers, working time directive. If you want to do away with those, I don't think that's a good thing.
Mr. Alambritis, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, sorry for starting a little bit late. Thank you guys for all coming. So today's event is a collaboration between Parikiaki and Nepomak UK. We have here three fantastic panel members that I'm delighted to introduce to you. We'll be having a talk from both Chriso and the Councillor Alambritis, and then we'll be doing a bit of a panel, so a Q&A. So feel free to ask questions, and we'll just get a bit of a conversation going there. So we'll get stuck in for starting a little bit late. I'll introduce you to Chriso Ioannou. So Chriso grew up in Winchmore Hill and attended Edmonton County School. She then went on to study modern history and politics at Royal Holloway University. Chriso's worked in insurance for 10 years, and that's what she's going to be talking to us about today. And she's also a key member of the organising team for Parikiaki's Cypriot Wine Festival. She's also a member of the Secretariat of the National Federation of Cypriots. So, Chriso, would you like to come up?
Thanks, Harry, for the introduction. On behalf of the Parikiaki, I'd like to welcome you all here this evening. The Parikiaki is encouraged to see interest from the younger generation in the community for events such as this, and hopes this joint event on Brexit with Nepomak is the first of many. And as on a more general note, as part of building towards the future, I'm pleased to announce that as of next week's Parikiaki edition, the newspaper will be in a new modernised, full-colour tabloid redesigned format, so trying to sort of move with the times there. I'll start off by saying that I'm definitely not a Brexit expert, if there is even a Brexit expert out there. But I work as a compliance consultant in the London market insurance industry, which includes both general insurance companies and the global institution of Lloyd's of London, which means that my job essentially is to look at all the relevant financial regulations and apply them to the companies I work for and make sure that they're all operating to these regulations. So I'll be outlining the impacts of Brexit on the insurance industry from my perspective. As a general background, while specific regulation in financial services is specific to each country and how it's monitored is specific to each country, the kind of the principles on which these regulations are based are all based on sort of EU directives, so they should be fairly similar for all member states. So as an example, if I were to complain to my bank in the UK, the specific timescales for responses and everything will be UK specific, but the principle of being able to complain to your financial ombudsman is an EU directive that every member state should offer its consumers and its public. And this is really important from a sort of industry point of view in respect of Brexit, because this synergy of regulations means that all regulated firms that are all authorised within the European Union can carry out regulated activities in any other European country without needing extra authorisations or extra sort of oversight. So they do this through a mechanism called passporting, and passporting is really important for the UK insurance industry because London is one of the global insurance hubs in the world, and it insures as well as reinsures both domestic and international risks on a massive scale. It's estimated that London branches of insurers headquartered in the EU and that just have a branch in the UK underwrite almost £6 billion worth of insurance premium in the London market. You also have a lot of European companies that write insurance for their domestic markets through passporting rights, and a lot of these are household names with significant market shares. And you don't even need a branch often as well. A lot of European insurers will sell products to UK customers through online platforms and sort of, just online sort of sales or add-ons to retailers' products. And so it contributes to a massive, significant sort of proportion of sort of the economic market and contribution to financial services in London. And therefore, as well as helping the businesses themselves from a turnover point of view and a sort of success point of view, it gives better competition to customers and a better service to customers because of that competition. And so there's a lot of benefits there because of passporting rights. There is a plus side to the argument in terms of talking about advantages and disadvantages of Brexit, in that because the UK won't be bound by EU laws, it could, in theory, create a whole new set of regulations for financial services and for insurance that aren't as onerous to comply with. And it can disagree with EU directives and do something different. So, for example, a few years ago, there was an EU gender directive which meant that it was no longer allowed for UK firms or European firms to use gender as a factor influencing how insurance policies are underwritten and sort of priced. So even though there's evidence that women on the whole are safer drivers than men, you weren't allowed to offer women better premiums than men. And so things like this are kind of unfair based on the experience and evidence that insurers have at their disposal. And so things like this and other kind of directives such as this are probably going to be pushed back when the time comes from industry bodies like the Association of British Insurers, so they're disbanded and ignored as part of the new legal framework. However, this would also come with significant difficulties. As you can imagine, it can't, changes to complete regulatory framework can't happen overnight. A lot of time and resources would need to be taken by firms to ensure that all their policies, procedures, documents, promotions are all compliant with the new regulations. And this will be a massive short-term cost to insurers and brokers. This also wouldn't solve the problem of how to accommodate the international nature of the London insurance market. So Lloyd's, for example, is a global brand. It has built its 332-year reputation on underwriting niche insurance. So, for example, over the years, it has insured David Beckham's legs, Bob Dylan's voice. It does satellite insurance, fine art insurance, jewelry collections. It insures against natural catastrophes, cyber attacks, terrorist attacks, the whole range. So really, really niche insurances that you don't find in the rest of the kind of the global insurance market. The impact of a no deal on the insurance industry for UK headquartered insurers would be catastrophic. There has been a lot of lobbying from Lloyd's itself and industry bodies calling for the government to consider the needs of financial services as part of its plans for leaving the EU and as part of a kind of final deal. But while we don't know what the government are up to, there is so much uncertainty that the insurance industry almost has had to just move ahead with its own initiatives and contingency plans in the meantime. It simply can't wait for a deal to be announced. So insurance policies can't be put on hold, they can't be paused. Insurance is needed. You can't just say, right, well, we'll wait for a few months and see what happens. So since the referendum vote a couple of years ago, the industry has invested a lot of time and money identifying potential solutions to their business models. To be eligible for passporting rights, firms have to have a registered head office in an EU country. And so the solution for many companies has been to set up a new insurance company in Brussels or Luxembourg or Dublin or wherever. And this in itself isn't just a quick decision. A lot of money is being invested in researching the best environment to set up those companies, and the logistical nightmare of transferring existing business to the new companies is a complete nightmare. I mean, I think it has. So Lloyd's itself has decided to set up an entity in Brussels. It will go live from the 1st of January, so pre-Brexit. It just had to. There is no choice. And insurers that only operate within Lloyd's can just piggyback off their work and take a share of the cost. But the estimate for Lloyd's in setting this up is 120 to 160 million euros to set this entity up and have it operating for the 1st of January. If you're a non-Lloyd's insurer, then you have to just do all this work for yourself. I think it's going to cost at least a couple of £1 million for the average size insurance company. And not only you've got to worry about the cost, you've got to worry about the time and resource of directors and senior managers in strategically identifying this as a solution and pushing the project forward despite all this uncertainty and sort of changing deadlines and sort of moving goalposts. So because consumers and policyholders have had to remain protected, beyond the 30th of March 2019, policies technically will be in breach of compliance and of the passporting and licensing sort of allowances that are currently there. So that also means premiums and claims would be in sort of full in breach as well. So again, just servicing the average insurance contract beyond March can potentially be a real hassle and be of detriment ultimately to the consumer, the customer at the end. If I can't legally pay you a claim, then how do you get around that? So there will be a massive operational nightmare to make sure that we don't, insurers don't disadvantage the customers in any way. So either way, I would say from my perspective, Brexit is certainly going to keep me and other compliance professionals in the market very busy for the foreseeable future. But to a large extent, insurers have had to put the contingency measures in place anyway for prudent management and stability of their own businesses. So the outcome of a Brexit deal is largely irrelevant at this stage for my industry. Brexit has without a doubt added extra financial pressures to an already difficult few years for insurers, particularly because there have been a lot of global catastrophe events that have meant significant, mass claims payments, and a number of insurers have actually had to stop trading, which again reduces competition and choice for the customer. However, London is still seen as the leading insurance market in the world and a market leader in product innovation and expertise. So Brexit or no Brexit, it's unlikely to lose its competitive edge. And so we'll be trading as normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Chriso. That was very interesting. It's very interesting to hear someone from a very different background to me, I guess. And I don't know if that was the same for everyone else here. So thank you for that. I myself work in construction, so I'm a chartered surveyor. So I deal with a lot of investment into mainly Birmingham and the production of housing or offices in the Midlands as well. And much like yourself, there was a huge gasp, I think, when Brexit was announced. I guess different to you was there was a pause in the market and everyone took a breath and wanted to see what was going to happen. We've gone back to normality at the moment. But I'm sure again when the talks move forward in the coming months that there'll be another pause to see what's going to happen with investment and what's going to happen with production of housing and investment generally in London and the Midlands. So, moving on to our main speaker for the evening, Councillor, the leader of Merton Council. Welcome. We're honoured to have you here. So, a brief history. Stephen grew up in Aradipo in Cyprus. A lot of the people from the Midlands are from Aradipo, so it's a place that I'm very acquainted with nowadays. And studied at the London School of Economics. He has been a councillor of Merton Council in 2006 and was elected the leader in 2010 and subsequently re-elected in 2014 and in 2018. Under his leadership, the council won an award for the best council. Stephen is also very well known for his work with small businesses and is a former head of public affairs at the Federation of Small Businesses. He is currently the chair of South London Partnership, a group of South London boroughs, and a member of the European Committee of Regions. Again, Stephen, thank you. We're honoured to have you here.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. If you'll allow me to speak in English, there are a number of words that don't have a Greek interpretation. I don't know what Brexit is in Greek, or what backstop is in Greek. But yes, as Theresa May said, Brexit is Brexit. What I wanted to do was say a few words politics, look at some of the history that has brought us to this position. Have a look at some of the thinking of the group of politicians that decided on all this. Then going to some big issues, economic security, immigration, and then going to some of the advantages and disadvantages. And I have to be honest with you, I am not a Brexiteer. I am not a leaver. I was born in Cyprus. My parents came over in 1964. I'm European to my core, and so it's been very difficult for me to drum up any advantages, but I will do my best. If I drum up an advantage and then destroy it, please bear with me. But the history of Britain and the European Union is a problem that is older than the Cyprus problem. So after 1945, Churchill won the war, even though he lost the election of 1945, because the people of this country said, thank you, Mr. Churchill, for winning the war, but we think you're a good military man, but in terms of building houses, we think Clem Attlee, Labour, will be good at building houses for peacetime. And so, but he was still very popular on the European scene, Churchill. He's just, along with the Russians and the Americans, and his great speech, he's beaten the Nazis. So in 1946, he made a famous speech and called for the Union, for United States of Europe. That is quite something. So the history of the Conservative Party with regard to the European Union goes back to 1946. In 1957, you had what was then the European Coal and Steel Community. About 6 countries coming together to trade with each other on those industrial materials, coal and steel. And Britain didn't join that. So the problem with the European Union for Britain goes back to 46 to 57, and obviously to 74, 75, when Britain joined, then rejoined, and then joined again under Harold Wilson. So there are big issues, and always have been, between this country, and it's ambivalent or ambiguous or uncertain or not 100% approach to the European Union. So let's go to 2010. David Cameron, Gordon Brown has lost the election. David Cameron has won the election, but not enough to have a majority, and so he enters a coalition with Nick Clegg, who's now working for Facebook. So you have a coalition of Conservatives and Liberal Democrats in 2010 with David Cameron Prime Minister and Nick Clegg as the Deputy Prime Minister. But you recall the negotiations, 3 or 4 days, the country had voted, and there was no government, because those 2 parties in particular were working hard to see how they could form a government. And 2 things made that possible. One, Cameron persuaded Clegg to vote for tuition fee increases, when Clegg, in his manifesto, said he would abolish tuition fees. On the other hand, Nick Clegg persuaded David Cameron to drop the idea of a referendum on Europe, and Clegg and Cameron dropped it. And the right wing of his party agreed, because they desperately wanted power. So that was the deal. We then come to 2015, and David Cameron wins a general election with a majority without needing Clegg on his shoulder. But he says to himself, I don't know why he did this, he says to himself that he's made a promise in his manifesto that there would be a referendum, in his manifesto of 2015. Vote for me, I'm David Cameron, and I will present a manifesto. There's a lot of concern about UKIP and the rise of UKIP at that time. So David Cameron thought it would be a good idea. So he went ahead with the idea for a referendum. But before he did that, he embarked on a series of visits to Brussels to try and get a good deal, so that he could come back and have a referendum with a good deal that he struck with Europe. And if you recall, Europe said that's too much, because he was hitting at the heart of what the European Union stands for: free movement of goods, free movement of people, free movement of capital, and free movement of labour. And when he was going into Brussels to get a good deal to come back, rather like Neville Chamberlain, peace in our time, or I've got you a good deal, he was hitting at the very core of the European Union, which was countries coming together with no borders. And to give him his due, George Osborne said to him on one of these occasions when he went to Brussels, he says, look, why don't you go to the meeting and storm out halfway? Say the meeting is 10 till 2. Storm out halfway at 12 o'clock, and I'll have the cameras there. And just storm out and say, that lot, the Brussels lot, aren't listening to me. I'm not getting anywhere with them. And until they come to their senses, I'm calling off this referendum. That's what Osborne advised him to do, and he didn't do it. He went ahead with the referendum. Now, I'm going to call that one of the worst political decisions of any prime minister since Neville Chamberlain came back with that piece of paper. For a prime minister to believe in Europe, to be pro-EU, to be a European, as he says he is, to put it to the country at a time when there were huge issues, especially with immigration, and at a time when the big players on the European scene, whether you like them or not, whether you agreed with their politics or not, John Major, Kenneth Clarke, Gordon Brown, Tony Blair were big Europeans. They were in Europe, of Europe, with Europe. They weren't around. Who did he have leading the Labour Party? Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is European, but the conviction isn't as great because he worries about big organisations. Jeremy Corbyn is not with conglomerates and big corporations and no borders. So if I was David Cameron and I was going to argue a case to stay in Europe with a Labour Party that was having issues, that was divided, and led by Jeremy Corbyn, who over the years hasn't shown himself to be a big European, I wouldn't have called it. So I'm afraid, in my estimation, it was a very, very poor judgment on the part of David Cameron, who is now no longer on the scene, has bought a shed for £25,000 to write his memoirs, whilst this country is driven by division and anger and people. It's like civil war in some families. Either you're for leaving or for remaining. Okay, so let's look at some big issues, and then I'll get on to some of the minor issues. And it's actually some of the minor issues that will come to play if we do leave, that I believe will go back in eventually. But we'll see. So the Brexiteers, those who wanted to leave, argue that it would result in an immediate cost saving to this country because, you know, the country does contribute to the EU budget. And in 2016, Britain paid in £13 billion, but received £4 billion back in benefits, in rights, in investment, and so on. So the net contribution in 2016 was 8.5 billion. But you know, there is huge benefit in being in a club of 28 member countries and being able to trade without tariffs, without the goods being checked backwards and forwards, with standards roughly similar on whether it's drugs or whether it's cars and so on. So there is that benefit as well. So one of the advantages is we wouldn't have to pay in. One of the disadvantages is actually we weren't paying in that much, and what we were paying in, we got plenty of it back in terms of being in a club of 28 member states, 500 million consumers with the same rights: consumer safety, food hygiene, consumer protection. You buy something that's dodgy, you can get it back. These are all steeped in European regulations, whether they're directives or regulations or acts of parliament or what have you. So let's go to the single market. No tariffs are imposed on imports and exports between member states. So those 28 countries can sell to each other every day. There's no extra tax on it. Normally, the capitalist system is based on if things move and there's a transaction, that's when the government gets its tax. That's when the government claws money in. Movement of things, goods, shares, and so on is transactions. That's when. So, but here in terms of trade, 50% of the UK's exports go to the European countries, EU countries. So Ford cars, Jaguar, Land Rover cars. BMW's made here and sent over. So 50% of everything we send out of this country goes into those 27 member states: France, Italy, Germany, Belgium, and so on. And that's a big advantage in my book. The disadvantage is that if we do leave that, so that's a big advantage. Now, the disadvantage of leaving is that you would lose all that, and there'd be tariffs, and British goods would be more expensive to sell. So why wouldn't someone in Brussels buy a car from France rather than from over here, if in buying it from over here, it's going to have a great big whopping tax on it? Now, the advantage of coming out of Europe, according to the Brexiteers, is that we as a country would be able to make contracts with India, Singapore, Norway, with Burma, with Ghana, with Africa, because at the moment, because we're members of the European Union, all our trade deals are negotiated through Brussels. So the UK can't just go and do something with India. It's all got to go through the European Union trade mechanism. And so that's one advantage of leaving, that you can strike out on your own, that Britain can. And Britain is a great country, and British people are clever, and huge inventions are here. But the world has moved on from the empire days, when they went into countries like Nigeria and Ghana and Cyprus, and they extracted things. It was all about extraction, and it's about making things these days. The other advantage will be we can strike deals with an organisation called EFTA, the European Free Trade Area. And Norway is in this, Iceland is in this, Liechtenstein is in this, and Switzerland is in this. So you leave a club that has Arsenal, Liverpool, Chelsea, Tottenham, Fulham, yeah? And you go and join a division that's got Hartlepool, Sutton, Haringey Borough, it's got Darlington. Oh, I forgot Manchester United. What's going on here? So I get the sense of, being, is there a better world out there? That's one of the advantages. It's a curiosity thing. So that can be an advantage, that you leave and you can strike out on your own, and it'd be much better because you won't be hidebound by all the regulations. And one of the arguments that I understood, and when I was working at the Federation of Small Businesses, is not many small businesses trade with Europe, not many small businesses export, but they are bound by the regulations that come from the European Union. And so that is an advantage, according to the Brexiteers. The other thing that would be an advantage is that we can strike out with Canada. That is another view, so that you do a trade deal with, rather like Canada, not membership of the single market, but some kind of quasi trade deal, and that you would get a very, very bright future in that, according to Boris Johnson. Now, when Canada struck the deal with the European Union, so the EU does deal with Canada in a kind of way that doesn't mean Canada is in the EU, it took 7 years. To strike trade deals, it takes years. And I can't see Liam Fox doing that in a year or 2 years. It takes a long time to strike trade deals. But I can see the advantage of this clear blue water out there, full of opportunities that may come over. On investment, and is it Chriso? Yeah. Insurance, the world of Lloyd's is known for being in London. It's Lloyd's of London, isn't it? Lloyd's of London were coffee houses in the old days. They were just coffee houses where people over coffee struck deals. And then there's the London Stock Exchange, which is my word is my bond. All these are great British institutions. And so there is a concern that the City of London, Lloyd's of London, would be diluted as some of these core companies not leave the UK, but also, as Chriso said, have a base in Brussels. London is obviously more exciting than Brussels. I go to Brussels once a month for the Committee of the Regions. But that is a cost, and as Chrisos intimated, although these are big companies, some of the smaller ones will have to do it, and the cost will go on your premium. So that's a disadvantage, I think. I don't think there is any advantage in losing headquarters from London or from Newcastle or Sage from Glasgow or what have you. So that can be a disadvantage when headquarters move. One of the advantages the Brexiteers say is that we can be a Singapore-style supercharged economy. Singapore is hugely successful, but I don't know the scale of it myself, but it is hugely successful. Car makers are worried about what's happening. As we know, Rolls-Royce, BMW, they do like the benefits of what EU member confers. Now, the UK buys more from the EU than the EU buys from the UK. We buy more from the EU than the EU buys from us. So there's a trade deficit. So it's in the interest of the European Union that we stay. They would like us to stay. So it is sad to see financial firms, banks, trading, having to think about moving away. That's not right, I don't think. So one of the big advantages of leaving, according to the Brexiteers, is that we would claim back our sovereignty, as though we've lost it. We would claim back our sovereignty. That Parliament has been diluted. Well, I see question time every Wednesday. I don't see any lack of fighting or shouting at each other. You have private members' bills on a Friday, that continues. You have statutes, you have bills, you have select committees, you have standing committees. You've got number 10, number 11. The French aren't in there. Number 10 is where the power is for the UK government. UK government, Parliament is sovereign. It can do whatever it likes. It can undo what previous parliaments have done. So, but they're saying one of the advantages is that we would claw back some of the domestic proposal. Thank you. Some of the domestic stuff that we've lost, and claim back our sovereignty. It's like claiming back your street, claim back your park. You know, there's crime in the park. Claim it back by going out there. Claim back your streets from the car, from motorists. Let's have more pedestrianisation. Let's claim back our roads. Let's claim back our houses, our living rooms. It's a facetious argument that as though we've lost it in all these years. Parliament is sovereign. Her Majesty the Queen is the head of the Crown. Statutes are marked by goat skin. Conventions are there, the Speaker, the Speaker's house. Everything is still there. Nothing has been denuded or diluted. But what they do say is that we've had to adopt a lot of European regulations. That's what they're saying. So if we leave the EU, we can undo them all. So who's got children that are at work here in London? If you put your hands up. You have children that work. Chriso works, you'll work. There's a European directive, 48-hour working directive, and that says if you want to work more than 48 hours, you have to sign up to it. That's a European directive. And Mr. Fox and Mr. Rees-Mogg want to do away with that. They want to do away with that. So you can be forced to work 48 hours. Has anyone got anyone who works part-time? They got relatives who work part-time, you know. They have the same rights as full-time workers. That will go if we leave the EU. You've all heard of the national minimum wage, the living wage, which the Conservative Party is doing very well with. As a Labour politician, I give them that in terms of the living wage. All that may be diluted if we come out of the EU. So there's worker protection, worker safety, health and safety, and they say that that's a disadvantage because too many regulations on businesses. Others say that is an advantage. So Hilary Benn, who's a good stick, says the truth is that pulling up the drawbridge and quitting the EU will not enhance our national sovereignty. We are still a sovereign state. All it will do is to weaken it by taking away our power of influence in events in an ever more complex and interdependent world. So I talked about Blair, Brown. Let's talk about Thatcher. She was a great European. Didn't agree with her politics. I was, along with many others, said she was Thatcher the milk snatcher and all that goes with how she's viewed. But she was a great European. She believed in the single market. She would never have pulled out. She did say no, no, no to Jacques Delors, but she was within it fighting Britain's cause. And Kenneth Clarke, great politician, father of the house, Michael Heseltine, John Major fought Maastricht. These are conservative one-nation politicians who believe that Britain should be in there fighting. When I did my thesis at the LSE, it was on, I was more left-wing then, it was on, I was curious whether there were any communist MPs in the UK. Had there been? 5. There were 5. Try and remember them. Saklat Vala, Newman, Newbold, Willie Gallagher. The last one was still alive at the time. I'm showing my age now, 1983. So I went to interview him. So my thesis was revolutionaries in Westminster, communist MPs in the House of Commons. And I just looked at their background and why did they get elected? Why didn't the Communist Party have a bigger presence in Parliament? That's because the Labour Party took over the... And he said, Stephen, if you're a boxer, you want to win a fight, where do you have to be? I said, well, in the ring. Exactly. You can't win it from outside the ring. So there are a lot of good conservatives who believe we need to be in Europe and influence Europe and lead Europe, not leave Europe. So now, the Remainers are absolute about the need to be in the EU. And if we come out, we'll still be bound by the United Nations, we'll still be bound by NATO, we'll still be bound by World Trade Organization. So this thing that, oh, we're going to free ourselves if we come out of the EU, well, we might as well come out of NATO as well, come out of the UN, come out of the World Trade Organization, leave the Royal Commonwealth, and just be our own little England. And that's, if you want to take it that far. But we will lose out, I think, if we do. So let's look at immigration. Immigration has been hugely positive in this country. And I would imagine 60-80% of us here are immigrants. Who was born abroad? Yeah, so we're immigrants. My father caught the Messapia, is it? Messapia was a boat, a liner, in 1964. Took a week to go to Genoa. From Genoa train to Dover, and that was... So we're immigrants, and I'm an immigrant. And there are industries in this country that would collapse without those immigrants. The industries in this country were built by immigrants. So one of the arguments by the Brexiteers is that we will control our borders and we can clamp down on immigration. That means jobs are taken away from people who are already here, and so on and so forth. But the other argument is, of course, that there would be a number of industries that would lose out, and I'll go through those. So Kent farmers would lose out. The fruit pickers are all Polish people. Is there anyone here who fancies degutting fish from 3 in the morning till 9 in the morning up in Glasgow docks? Do you know who does that job? Latvians, Polish, and so on. No Scot does that job. So there are jobs that are done primarily by immigrants. So, but they do have a point in terms of this feeling that immigration had got out of hand, and that by pulling out of the EU, we can control immigration, or stop people having rights to come here without having to go through too many immigration loopholes. But we still need to control immigration from non-EU countries. So let's look at jobs. If we leave, will there be more jobs for us? So pro-EU campaigners say that 3 million jobs will be lost if Britain voted to leave. So that's a disadvantage of leaving. And we are very, 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 very dependent. There'll be skill shortages. And the London School of Economics says that the brightest and the best of the continent won't feel like coming here. And I think that is not good. So one of the arguments that is used by the Brexiteers is that we can start to be more interested and more involved with NATO if we leave the EU, and with the United Nations, because one of the fears of the Brexiteers was that the EU was going to have a European army, that they were building up towards a European army. Now, if the UK, which was an opponent of a European army, pulls out, then the EU may move towards building one of its own, having a European army. And I don't think whether that's good or not, but it would give rise to tensions in the Balkans, with Russia, and so on. So I don't think that would be very, very good. Okay, so let me go through some of the disadvantages, which are people understand because it hits them personally. But before I do, would you think that something that was supported by both Vladimir Putin and Boris Johnson is a good thing? Something that is supported by two people from completely opposing views, although Boris has got Russian blood. So what is it that has brought these two people together? That Vladimir Putin wants the UK to come out of Europe, and so does Boris Johnson. I think if those two are happy about something, I've got concerns about it. Just a point. Okay, so just finishing on advantages and disadvantages. Jobs out of London, Airbus, Vauxhall Motors, Jaguar Land Rover, BMW, Rolls-Royce, but you get a blue passport. You will get a blue passport from France. They're going to be made in France. Do you remember those lovely blue passports? Yeah, so that's an advantage. You will not have that. There's your pullover, sir. That's the colour, burgundy, of the current passport. When we leave, you get your blue passport back. Households, Bank of England, 22 million households in this country, about 22 million. Divided by 3, there's just 66 million people that live in this country. I know that because there are 22 million households that pay council tax. Bank of England says 22 million households, there'll be roughly 900 to £1,000 a year off, worse off. I believe the Bank of England. I don't believe David Davis, and I don't believe Rees-Mogg. I believe the Bank of England. I don't believe Rees-Mogg, who's investing away from England. I don't believe that. I don't believe in Mr. Dyson, who's a Brexiteer. The Hoover, do you have a Dyson Hoover? He's sent all his manufacturing abroad. I don't believe these people, that they're patriotic somehow. So 22 billion, if my maths is right, 22 million divided by 1,000, is that 22 billion? Must be. So EU citizens, this is uncertainty now. You know, if you live here and you're an EU citizen, or if you live in Cyprus and you're a Brit, so you're UK but live in Spain, or live in an EU country. So 2.9 million people, EU people, live here, and they don't know what's going to happen. Yes, Theresa May has said we will guarantee and make sure and this and that, but it's still hugely uncertain. Is it for them? Is it for their children? Can a relative come over and stay? So huge uncertainty. And there's uncertainty for UK citizens in EU states, 1.2 million. So if you live here and you go to Cyprus and you're a UK citizen, there's about 1.2 million of you where you get your pensions and so on and so forth. I'll go on to that. Pensions. If you're a Brit in Cyprus getting your state pension, it won't be uplifted by the rate of inflation. It may not take advantage of the triple lock, CIPR or 2.5% or what have you. It may not get that. You still get your pension, your state pension, but here in this country, it's got a triple lock. It's uplifted every year. But it may be that because it's been paid abroad, it may not take advantage of that uplift. If you have a pension that's private pension, so you worked here and you had a private pension with your company, you now go to Cyprus, which is an EU member state. I just can't believe it, what I'm saying. Little old Cyprus, with a population of 800,000, is an EU member state. And Britain, 66 million, great country, wonderful people, a fair country, he wants to pull out. I just can't believe it. So if you have an annuity, what's called an annuity, Chriso will know all this, it may be that the company here having to pay your pension, your private pension over there, will incur costs and may charge you and deduct from your pension on those costs because there's something to do with how they pay and exchange rates and so on. I'm not an expert, but those are two uncertainties on that. 30% of all our food comes from the EU, including halloumi, basturma, trahana. I bought trahana yesterday, no, Sunday, from the church I go to. I couldn't believe it. My mother's going to make it. My mother-in-law's going to make it tomorrow. She lives next door. Must be good. So 30% of all our food comes from the EU. 40% we make ourselves, 30% from the EU, and 30% from other countries, Africa, China, Russia, wherever. And there's concerns that we may need to stockpile food, but food at the moment comes in on an as and when needed basis. So it comes from the EU straight into restaurants, straight into supermarkets. But because of if we have no deal, if there are huge uncertainties, we may have to stockpile, and there's no space to stockpile. Now let's look at those workers who work in the food industry. 30% of all workers in food industry come from the EU. 30% of all the workers in this country who work in the food industry come from the EU. I don't think they work in the upmarket restaurants. Well, a lot of them would do, but I'm talking about the fruit trade, Kent, strawberry pickers, apple pickers, grape pickers. All those are EU and foreign citizens. And also, did you know 85% of people who work in abattoirs are either EU or foreign nationals? 85% of all. And they're saying that immigration has taken our jobs. It's because when you come over from another country and you're at a low, or you're desperate, or you want work, and you're desperate to have the dignity of work, you accept what is given. So when my father came over in 1964, he worked in the kitchens in the Dorchester Hotel, in the kitchens. My mother worked in the rag trade in the Angel. They're not choice, but that's what they did, just to get up. Medicines and drugs. Again, another question, whether we'll be stockpiling. We need 6 weeks worth of drugs in case there's a problem, because you can't wait for your insulin if you need it. You can't wait for your heart failure tablets and wait for those. So that's going to cost us £2 billion to fly in medicines if there are problems, and there'll be major labour shortages in hospital. My wife works at the Charing Cross Hospital. She's an hematologist. She's worked there for 39 years, and she's seen the changing face of the people who work with her. So when I first met her, she was working with Jane and with John and with Peter. Now she's working with Boris, with Slavik, with Edna, with and so on, and Svetlana, and Iranians and Iraqis and Sudanese and so on. So there will be labour shortages. European coach UK coach operators will need to register their headquarters in an EU member state if they want to work from here. Who is that famous Greek coach operator who was late for my wedding? When I got married in Birmingham, the coaches were late from here. What's his name? I've forgotten his name now. The coach guy. Dino, that's it. Is he still at it? He was an hour late for my wedding. All the relatives came up late. You had me and the Archbishop Methodios. You remember Archbishop Methodios? He married me. He was gone within 2 weeks. Right, that's that one. Let's look at the British bases in Cyprus. What's going to happen to them? The British bases in Cyprus. So the Brits have send their goods in and out through most of the Cypriot ports. But once they are not members of the EU, and those ports are EU ports, you can't just use them. You have to be an EU member, otherwise there'll be checks and so on. So the Brits have allocated Number 10 has allocated £100 million to build up their port at Akrotiri, looking after themselves nicely. It's British land, I think. So that's what's happening there. We've done the food. Airplanes. If there is no deal, on that day, there will be no airplanes on the 29th of March. If there is no deal, there will be no airplanes flying. There will be don't book a holiday around that time. If you want to move your pet, you can move your pet left, right and centre now. If you want to go out with your pets on holiday, 4 days of quarantine. 4 days of quarantine you'll need. And there will need to be an emergency aviation deal, which I think the Europeans are confident will be struck. And UK-based airlines will lose their operating licence in 27 EU countries. UK-based airlines will lose so they have to barter, and your air prices will go up. I've never won one of these tickets to Cyprus, no return, in a raffle. I've never ever won it. Was it Olympus, Olympia, or whoever? Well, it's going to be even more. And finally, students, universities, and Brexit. 200,000 UK students have studied in the EU countries, 1987 to 2013, 200,000 here have studied abroad without paying huge fees. 125,000 EU students are studying here and not paying huge fees because they're classed as home students. And they bring in £3 billion a year, the EU students who come in to study at our great universities. Research grants, unis will lose about £1 billion in research grants. Erasmus we might lose, and that's not good. And finally, driving licenses. You won't need to get a new license test, but if you want to go to Cyprus, you can, at this moment, swap your UK license for a Cypriot passport straight away. But afterwards, after we leave the EU, your driving license, your UK driving license, does not apply in Cyprus, no longer valid in any EU member state. You may have to take another test, and you may have to apply for international driving permit. And you may have to apply for that to hire a car as well. So those are small. So I'm sorry I've not been big on advantages of pulling out, but there are huge disadvantages of disassembling yourself from a club. It comes at it does come at a huge cost. My personal view is that Theresa May, who used to be a councillor in Merton, Theresa May was a councillor in the London for 8 years. No impact then, no impact now. No impact then, no impact now. But my personal belief is she's actually working to keep us in the EU. I can't imagine a Prime Minister being so not incompetent, being so accidental in everything that's happening. Because she's a Remainer. She's a Remainer. She voted to stay in. She's a Remainer through her heart, and she stayed quiet during the referendum and came in between Boris and others who wanted to be the leader. But look, I think there should be a people's vote on the final deal. I don't think it should just be up to Parliament because people voted to pull out, and now this is the deal in order to pull out. So I think there should be a people's vote, and that vote should have an option to remain if the people say we don't like the deal, let's stay in. That's my preferred option, and the great supporter of that is Andrew Adonis, Lord Adonis, who's going up and down the country calling for a people's vote. Thank you. Happy to answer any questions.
Before we move on, just to touch on a couple of points that you mentioned. The first is there's a Brexit survey that's been undertaken by the National Federation of Cypriots. I understand that's now closed, so the results will be coming on that shortly. The other point is just touching on the second referendum that you've mentioned. Stephanos will be talking to us about that in a bit. He's written an article on that recently. Before we move on to the questions from everyone here, one difficult question for you. What do you prefer, trahana or avolemoni?
Avolemoni every time. Trahana is a bit like sick sometimes. But I do like it.
Good.
Yeah.
Right, so Stephanos, I'm delighted to say, is a member of Nepomak UK. He became a committee member in 2015, and he was elected as a councillor in 2018 for Southgate, the council of Enfield. North London born and raised, and I'm delighted to introduce Stephanos. Stephanos, thanks for coming.
I'm going to keep it incredibly short and sweet for the simple reason that we only have 10 minutes left, and I want to listen to some of your questions. But basically, where I will start off is just to say that actually the Conservatives was the party that took us into Europe. It took us in under Edward Heath, and it was Edward Heath. It was on the basis of we would be £3 better off, which back then was a significant sum. It was known as the European Economic Community, and it was based fundamentally on trade, immigration, defence, foreign relations, obviously part, but not as big an emphasis. And the argument was that something changed. Now, I'm the son of a refugee. I am passionate about the EU. I fundamentally believe that Brexit is a mistake, and I was on the campaign to remain inside the European Union. Until this day, people know my views, and when I went and campaigned on a doorstep and subsequently I was elected, I think Brexit played a very, very, very big part. And personally, I believe that this will eventually turn around, and I don't think Brexit is a permanent decision. Stephen, you touched on the fact actually that we're leaving for now, whether or not we leave, but actually maybe we might actually rejoin, and God forbid if we actually have to join the Euro. Keep that to yourselves. But I just want to say that we were the party that took us in, and now we're the party that's taken us out. And this is a very, very tough thing for us to do. You mentioned people like John Major, Kenneth Clarke, Heseltine, veterans within the party that I stood for. And now the atmosphere has changed. You go to party conferences, you talk to people, you speak to your own party members, and they're hostile towards you. They're hostile to what I believe in, and that has turned a lot of people off. So basically, I think Brexit is wrong for trade, for students, for our NHS, for our public services. And for the record, I'm actually putting a motion into Enfield Council to ask that Enfield Council do number one, ask for a people's vote, and actually does a vote amongst councillors to think that post-Brexit, do we believe that council funding will be seriously impacted in the local services that we provide to our constituents, because I think that's something people aren't taking into account. I mean, I don't know how much the budget of Merton is, but certainly in Enfield it's 1 billion plus. It's worrying if people can't pay their council tax. It's worrying if local businesses will struggle. It's worrying if we don't have the same revenues and it goes down. And it's going to affect my job. It's going to affect what I promise to people. And that's not something I'm prepared to do. And this is something that we told people before the vote. Even businesses said to people before the vote that we will move to the continent. You heard from Chriso. Lloyds has moved 400 jobs to Brussels. The intended investment Toshiba today is not building a nuclear plant up in Copeland. Investment is being dragged away. People are being dragged away. This is affecting public services. It's affecting the private sphere. It's affecting all aspects of life. And they warned us, and we warned them. And what's happening is now true, and they're running scared, and they're saying, well, it's only temporary, short-term pain, long-term gain. Actually, no. It's not short-term pain. It's short-term pain and long-term pain. Because you're leaving the biggest club in the world, you're leaving the biggest economic union in the world, you're leaving the biggest collaboration of people, of communities, of strategy, of tactics, of standing up on the world stage and fighting up for most of what I believe the European Union to be right values. We're leaving one of the best clubs, and we are going to become Little Britain. So I personally continue to be against Brexit, and I stand up in a party which few still remain. I stand up and I say that this is wrong, and I will continue to fight for that. Looking forward, I recently wrote an article 2 days ago, which I took a lot of thought into it. I said, what route now do we take? So, Theresa May is fighting for a good deal with the European Union. If she gets a deal, she will get that deal, and she will come back. She will say, this is a deal that is on the table, I think is a good deal, X, Y, and Z, etc., etc. I personally believe that in any situation, whether or not Parliament rejects it, which I think in one case she will bring back the deal. And personally, I feel, I don't know what the stance of Labour is on this, they're yet to clarify. But I don't know if it will pass through Parliament. I think it's highly unlikely it will pass through Parliament. In that situation, Theresa May is in a very, very difficult position. I personally believe that Theresa May will be gridlocked into calling for a second referendum and for a people's vote, which will have 3 questions on the ballot paper. Should we get a deal? And it will basically be to accept the deal given to us, withdrawal of Article 50, which means remaining a member of the European Union, or no deal. Now, at that point, you've gone from 2 questions of remain or leave to 3 questions where it could be 30-30-30, 30-30, whatever, you know. And then you're stuck in a really difficult position because the threshold and the will of the people, who knows? Because already we're 52-48, and it's changed since then, and Channel 4 did and this is my argument, that Channel 4 did the biggest conduct of the question of Brexit, in which 20,000 people took part, and it found 54-46 in favour of remaining inside the European Union. It's changed. It has changed. And it makes it difficult because you put 3 questions on the ballot paper. Number one, you're going to cause more division. So I don't think that's a route to go down. Theresa May, on the other hand, could not possibly get a deal from Europe. Could be, nope, sorry, no deal, take it or leave it. And at that point, the decision becomes much more clear. Either we withdraw Article 50 or we leave with no deal. Now, I don't know what you're hearing in Brussels, but when I speak with MEPs, I think that there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of negativity, and I don't think it's positive. They say it's 95% done. Take it or leave it. Personally, I don't believe it. And we're going to have a really difficult road ahead. So in that situation, what you call the will of the people, 52%, 2% is absolutely nothing. It's changed. I think a referendum is imminent. And if we don't deliver a referendum and we go through this, then the Conservative Party, the party that I stood for, is it's going to have a difficult time getting re-elected. And I just want to pose the question. It might be actually the first question, possibly, in case anyone else hasn't. In case someone else maybe doesn't have a question, is, Stephen, why isn't Jeremy Corbyn actually standing up and speaking to 48% of people, now turned 54 possibly, and saying we need a serious rethink? Because it might be his opinion on Europe is that inside him, I don't know if he went in the ballot booth and voted to leave, but I certainly believe that the Labour Party is pro-European, and I think there needs to be principles on the line here, not just party politics, and you need to actually stand up for what is right. And I think Labour, but also the Conservatives and also the Liberals, the Liberal Democrats are, I think, at the forefront of pro-Europeanism in saying that they're going to tear it up and stay inside Europe, whatever happens. At least that's what Vince Cable's saying. So I think parties need to take a stance. I think we need to take a stance. And I think a people's vote needs to happen. I think we've got a very difficult road ahead. So, yeah, chin up.